So today's topic is showcasing volunteer impact, enhancing recruitment and retention success. And so for those of you, that don't know me, so if we go to the next slide, my name's Gung. I'm the CEO and co-founder here at Civic Champs. You can see some details about my background here, but more importantly, I'm really excited to introduce Josh today, who's joining us from one of our partner organizations called Yearly. Josh is spent his past at 4-H as a director of marketing. And so he's from the nonprofit sector. Also, has an MBA as well. And so has a rich mix of both knowledge within the space, but also some business acumen. And his organization Yearly is a digital tool for you to create annual digital reports, right? So all those really nice, beautiful reports that you might see online, you can create that super easily with Yearly. And so he's our expert today to talk to us about how we can showcase volunteer impact, how you can leverage that to enhance your recruitment and your retention of volunteers. So Josh, I'll sort of turn it over to you. And I see more folks, saying hi in the chat. Thanks for doing that. Rebecca and Lily, appreciate you guys joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Gung, for having me. I'm excited to talk about volunteer engagement, especially as I see how it does and how it could pertain to impact reports. So I actually spent the first half of my career in the for-profit space at advertising agencies and at AOL, and then found myself at 4-H, like you mentioned, helping to run digital marketing there and brand and field marketing at their national office. And as part of that work, I worked with a lot of the 5 million volunteers that they have around the country, even more worldwide. And alongside of that, I was helping them to create both national and local reports. So impact reports and annual reports, and a lot of it included thanking volunteers and highlighting the great work that they did. So that's a little bit about what we're gonna chat about today. During that journey, I got fed up spending so much time building all these reports because, as you all know that are joining us today, it's hard to tell whether donors are paying attention to reports and other stakeholders too, like board members and volunteers. And you want them to, because it takes a long time to put together any type of marketing or fundraising collateral materials or communications that are thanking a group or showing the impact and showing how the money or the volunteer time has been spent. And you want to know your return on that in more than just the donation amount. If you create an impact report and then you see your donations go up by 1% the next year, just an example, but how do you know how it's affecting other aspects of the organization, like the time the volunteer is spending? We'll talk a little bit about that engagement factor today. So as a result, I co-founded Yearly, which is a platform for nonprofits to create their own web-based and engaging reports, and founded this company to really improve the whole process for nonprofits. So let's put that aside for a second, and we're going to start with a fun check-in question here. Which cartoon character that you see on the screen here best represents your relationship with volunteers? Throw that in the chat. I've got a 6-year-old at home and me, to be honest, which is why I thought of Looney Tunes when I think of cartoon characters. But I think it's a fun association game that you could play to try to think about when you're, thinking about your whole relationship with volunteers, who that best aligns with. And if you're not a Looney Tunes fan, you could still participate by mentioning other cartoon characters that you think best represent your relationship with volunteers. I think that if I think back to before I started Yearly, when I was in positive youth development, I would have to think about Bugs Bunny. So someone here just said Bugs all the way. I would think Bugs because he was friendly, always found a way, and you have to be really creative, I think, when you're thinking about creating different opportunities to share volunteer impact. And one of the things that we'll cover today is this concept that I'm finding that I'm not seeing enough appreciation specifically in impact reports and annual reports of volunteers. And I want to show examples that I think hit the mark, examples that could have room for improvement, and different tactical ways that you could do just that. Thank volunteers and show the impact that they're making. All right, great. So we got a couple more Bugs Bunnies. That's awesome. So we'll demonstrate that volunteer impact and highlight common ways that organizations are doing that. The importance of taking photos and videos while you're at different events that you can use in communications. I have a couple examples like I just mentioned, and attracting new recruits is important too. I mean, there's different types of volunteers that you have that are, putting in that 1 hour per month, per quarter, per year, versus those that are consistently there. And I want to think about how we can demonstrate the value those volunteers are bringing to your organization to ensure that they're seeing themselves in your communications and others are seeing it too and want to come and be a part of it. One of the big things that we work on at Yearly is digital reports. And I think that digital reports are a big and an easy way, since you're probably making annual and impact reports anyway, to do that. A digital report enhances the donor experience through interactive elements. So that includes thinking about how volunteers and other stakeholders you reach are seeing reports on various devices down to their cell phone. A digital report is a polished, engaging experience to showcase the impact. And it's about building connections with donors and funders and your board through different visual elements. So there's different forms of digital. PDF is one and web-based is another. I think about web-based when I talk about digital because that is something that's mobile responsive. That's something that you can use various media elements and assets for to help tell your story. And if you do a better job telling your story, you can really help your organization stand out from the competition. And it really allows you to showcase your qualitative impact a little bit better, because there's different media assets like video or social media that can use to help tell your story. There's some storytelling that you'll see that's text, and is not necessarily as user friendly and taking advantage of what people are used to seeing in a web-based or digital environment, which is complementing the text with photos, videos, and social media posts, things you already have to help tell your story. So we'll run through some situations and show some real examples of what I see out there of how you can tell stories like that are more engaging, showing what the volunteers have done or what you want them to do. Another thing that I think digital reports can help you do when you're showcasing volunteer impact is keeping the volunteers, engaged and interested versus just a static report, using those tactics that I talked about. So with Yearly, as I mentioned, we're a platform to build those types of reports, and we exist because we're trying to help organizations save time on production and meet those different goals, and then know that your reports are being utilized and read and how much time people are spent. And it looks a little like this, like you see on the screen. And we work with all types of organizations out there. Many of them. I'd say most of them are utilizing volunteers to help tell their story. And they're even doing it with personalizing reports as well, and getting down to a customized level. So the person reading the report really feels like it's just for them. So when I think about showing impact through reports, it really comes down to the storytelling. I talked about all of those different elements that could be on a report where you're recapping what volunteers did. And it's about being visual, and it's not just about the text that's there. So I also don't think it's limited to reports. I think there's many other ways you could show that impact throughout the year. Report's a nice way to package everything up at the end of a quarter, or at the end of an event, or when you want to showcase what your volunteers have been doing to your board. And certainly at the end of a year, or at certain milestones that make sense for your organization. But social media, stories that you tell in your blog, of course, are other ways that you can express what the volunteers are doing. I like to talk about reports because it is that nice way to package it up. And you don't have to start from scratch. You can really take all those assets you've collected throughout the year and put them all together so that you're not scrambling around thinking about the stories that the volunteers have done. I like the way that Civic Champs really presented this webinar in a summary from when you registered by talking about one of the points we were going to chat about here, which is thinking about capturing those stories at the actual event. So you may have an event coming up where volunteers are going to be. Think about having someone whose task it is to be dedicated towards capturing some photos and capturing some videos at the event. I think that's great. Something else I'm thinking of is along the lines of capturing quotes or testimonials from the volunteers, or maybe asking them about their personal stories as to why they're volunteering and what they're doing. Those types of interviews, whether they're written or it's a video, can be great content in that moment where you can go and then produce a blog post or a great social media post about that. But save it. You can mark all those throughout the year or throughout the quarter and then package it together to create a report. Whatever it is, you want to make sure it's unique to your brand. So if you're in youth development, I think I saw a few big in the chat, a few people from Big Brothers, Big Sisters, you know, and you're talking to kids and you're talking to families. You know, you want to make sure that you're talking about the volunteers that are the types of volunteers that you want to come work for your organization next. And you're highlighting the volunteers that are putting in the number of hours or doing the types of tasks that are typical to your organization, like youth development, because if someone's reading that and they're thinking about coming to volunteer, I think they'll probably get the impression, and let's assume that they don't know exactly what they'd be doing. They'll get the impression based on the stories that you put out there. The third bullet on here says make it scannable. And that's really just about focusing on not going too long with a story. I think that with impact reports, especially, or even creating spin-off reports like that could be like a volunteer report and a summary of what the volunteers have been doing. As much as we all love what that impact is in those stories, it doesn't have to be an extremely long story. It should be somewhat scannable so people can get the point, especially on their cell phone when they're busy. And if they want to read on, it could be a teaser where they could read more on your blog, and you can link out from there. We also don't have to tell every story that there is, and it's hard enough to find stories. So the ones you narrow it down to, and just having a few, I think is great. I think, you know, one or two can tell a much better story than telling 5 or 10, and of course takes much less time to actually create. And then the final point with the power of storytelling, I think, is to not do it in a vacuum. It's okay to share and take your time with it and get some other opinions on it. So stories need to be memorable, and great reports, great volunteer recaps, great impact stories really have to do with the details. And I have an image on here of tickets for my favorite team, the New York Jets. I'm based in the Washington, D.C. area now. I grew up in New Jersey, outside of New York City. And these are actual tickets that I collected when I was a kid. And I have this on the screen so I can tell you a little story about these tickets. And then we'll loop it back to volunteerism, I promise. So if you look closely on these tickets, you'll see it's from the year 1993, and they had a pretty good season. I started to collect tickets a few years before this, so I'd go to the games with my dad, and he went to the games with his dad starting in 1965. So I'm almost 14 years old at this point, and I'm really building up my ticket collection, but the Jets have been really building up their losses. So finally, they were having some luck, and they get to the playoffs that year. So I thought, oh, wow, I went to all these games, and finally we get to go to a big game. And we were thinking about how freezing it was going to be outside in January in New Jersey. I know these tickets only go through October, so the playoffs start in January, and it's cold. It's in the 30s. So we have this great idea that we're going to bring hot chocolate. So we make hot chocolate on the stove, and we did that because we wanted to have a big thermos of it. And you could bring anything into stadiums in those days. So we're going to bring it in and then have it because it was especially freezing. So we're early to the game. We're on the highway. We're almost there at the stadium. And my dad's driving and he looks at me and says, "Where's the hot chocolate?" And I said, "I don't know. Where's the hot chocolate?" We realized we left it at home, but we were pretty sure we left the stove on. Now, that caused all kinds of stress because we didn't want to have to go back home and then turn around and come back and then fight traffic and miss the start of the game. So what would you do today? You pick up your cell phone and you call someone that might be there and see if they can help you out. But this was a little before cell phones were readily available, so we didn't have that as an option. So we turned around and went home. No, the stove wasn't on, but the hot chocolate was sitting there. So we grabbed it, ran back in the car, got to the stadium, and I'm not sure how, but we didn't hit traffic and we got to our seats on time. The rest of the season didn't really work out that great, but we had a fun time. And I remember that about the hot chocolate because it's so detailed. And I tell that story only because I got into the details of the story. And I think that it's a nice example of detailed storytelling that I learned from my co-founder, Jeff, who tells a similar personal story, and from Oprah. And I'll share her example in a second. And if we were to go through our volunteer board and donor stewardship and get really memorable with our stories, there's certain details that people might remember. And it's those feelings and those memories of just specifics, the stove being on or off, or I was late to the game, that you might remember over time that helps build a brand and build this continuity between current and future volunteers and the mission and what you're doing. They may not remember everything that you said. You're not going to remember all the details I said, but in years from now, you may remember something about a stove being on and hot chocolate in a game, but that's part of the story that I'm telling. Oprah told a great story about how she remembers being a kid and defining the moment when she knew what she wanted to do with her career, because she was sitting on the linoleum floor that was in her mom's kitchen growing up, watching an award show on TV, and saw someone get an award, and she was just mesmerized by it. And she tells this whole story about how, because she's sitting on the floor, she could feel the coolness of the final. She was enthralled with what she was watching. And that kind of story, getting into the details, is really focusing on memorable moments. So when you're telling stories about volunteers, think about how they're really impacting those that you're affecting with your cause. So back to the youth development example, I mean, you're putting children in a place where they are making a positive impact on themselves and the people around them. And if your volunteers are helping them do that, talk about what they help them build. It's not about the volunteers themselves. The story is not about really the number of hours the volunteer put in. It's about the impact that they made on your constituents or your beneficiaries of your mission. I also like to think about all the messages that we all get during the day. You get a text, you get an email, and then of course there's ads. There's competition for people asking for volunteer time for other organizations that you have to compete with. You're looking for your own volunteers. You're doing your work. The doorbell rings. You're distracted. There's a limited amount of time to tell these types of stories too. It's even happening right now as I'm talking to you, I'm sure, because we're all busy. So having concise enough stories that cut to the chase and have that memorable factor is really, really important. I think that's what can set you apart from other organizations that aren't telling their stories as well, or maybe they're doing a great job, but you can do an excellent job. So that's really about cutting through the clutter. So these are some tips I have on the screen here about how to really effectively showcase stories to volunteer. You can show and tell your story. I think telling your story is really getting into the meat of it, like I was just talking about. I talked earlier about this tip about using video and social media, and I'll show you a specific of that as I plan to share my screen and show you some live reports on the screen. If you're going beyond social media or videos or your email marketing, and you think about using impact reports or volunteer thank you report or something like that, that's interactive. There's the idea of linking your audience to other assets that you have on your website, like a blog, so they can keep reading on, including testimonials, and just being really authentic, like the example that I gave. I mean, my story is fine with the tickets, but I think Oprah's is excellent. It's a really authentic story. It's personal to her, and it kind of cuts to the point. So if there's any, I'm gonna share my screen now. If there's any questions along the way, feel free to pop them in the chat. We'll have Q&A time at the end. I know that Civic Champ set up, but happy to answer along the way. And Gung, feel free to interrupt me if you see something pop up that I should answer in real time. Happy to do that. I'm going to go ahead now and share a few examples. Gung, I did intend to share my whole screen. Can we see the rest of my screen if I go through different tabs now?
I think so. Yeah, I see
Okay.
our team and partners. Yep.
Okay, great. So this is a report that I pulled from a great organization called EcoRise. And if we look at their table of contents in an impact report, they have this area called Our Teams and Partners. I think that this is an excellent report, and it demonstrates the impact. And when I scroll down, I see that they're highlighting their team, their board, and an advisory council. Okay, so I'll kind of keep scrolling and I'll see some partner logos from those that are supporting them, and some mentions and different collaborators. And in other similar type reports, I'll often see staff members, of course, or the senior leadership team. But I'm showing this because I think this is an example of a report where there's an opportunity. And the opportunity is to obviously highlight, volunteers that are here. We all have donor lists, and we all have lists of our board, and do a great job and partners, and do a great job of displaying that, like we see here in this annual type report. But it's an easy list that we can create that highlights volunteers. Now, I've been talking about impact stories and showing the the volunteers in action through photo and copy, and then and maybe video and social media. But an easy list could be created too of all the volunteers. And if you have a lot, they all don't have to be there. You can highlight those that have won an award or been exceptional. So I say that so you can just kind of really look within the reports that you have in your own organization, or whatever communication tools you're using to get the word out about what you're doing broadly, and think about how you can slot those thank yous and mentions, and of course highlights for volunteers throughout. Another example of that is this other report I see from a zoo. It's a great report. And then I get to a section of the table of contents that says, get involved, stay committed. Okay, so I go and I see what that's about. And it's really about giving and make a donation. And that's great. I mean, that's a goal for most organizations. But there's an opportunity here to get involved and ask someone to sign up to be a volunteer, especially if they went through the effort of having QR codes and asking for donations. I think there's room for multiple calls to action in a situation like this. So if you're an organization that's constantly looking to recruit volunteers, which is probably the case, think about the different communication pieces where you're asking for donations already, and maybe there could be a secondary call to action for people to volunteer. Because everybody might not be in a situation where they can donate, or maybe they would donate a small amount, but what they really want to do is lend their time and donate their time. It's a great opportunity to do that. Now, I found this incredible report that did just what I'm talking about, really, and it kind of combines it all into one. This is an organization that has a whole section dedicated to, let's see what they call it, how you can support our work. And when I start at the top of that section, they have a general message about it and how you can support. Of course, they talked about the donations, but then they go into the volunteer opportunities that are ahead. On the left, they say volunteer on our board of directors, and then on the right, volunteer on some other boards. So they own a few properties that I think are based around senior living. Now, they don't give all the information here, and they don't need to. It's a teaser, it's promotional, it's within an overall impact report they put out once a year. It doesn't seem like they were looking to have a comprehensive sign-up form here or something embedded, which they could, but they link out to it, and then a new tab opens, and that's great. The only thing I would add to this is an example highlighting what one of the volunteer board of directors is doing now and how you can make an impact. But I bet if I were to click on this, I'll see more about that story so I can fully understand that opportunity. So what I did using our tool at Yearly is I mocked up what I thought would be an ideal situation to highlight volunteers in an impact report. Generally speaking, every organization's different. What you're asking the volunteers to do and how often you're asking them to do it obviously varies, but I took a mock impact report with a template that I have here, and I just created a new volunteer section. I made it similar to a section I have that highlights our people, which is about the staff and the board. And I just duplicated that. And by having volunteers in a separate section, what I'm communicating is this idea that the volunteers are special. We value them. It's very different than our staff, and I wanted to show that it could certainly be included in a staff's in the same section or area as highlighting the staff or the board. But I think there's something to calling them out separately. So I was intentional about showing an image in the background here that shows, like, people are working that may be volunteers at what may be a food bank, right? And since it's a mock report, I just used some stock photography here, but I called it volunteers so people can clearly see what the section's about. And then, I mocked up this situation where we can give a shout out calling out to the volunteers. If I was volunteering for this organization and I had a sort of a headshot or an image that was thanking me, just like they highlight their staff or their board, wow, like I would really feel like they really value me, feel that love from that organization. It doesn't have to be as big and bold as this. This is just one style I picked. But it would be really interesting to highlight volunteers in such a way. I mean, any mention at all, I think, would be more than they were asking for and be a surprise. I also just used one of our templates here, so it made it easy to make large headshots or small headshots. Then I mocked up what a spotlight would look like. And to me, it would be a short blurb of text showing how they impacted the constituents, like I talked about earlier. There's this nice example that Jeff Rum, my co-founder at Yearly, likes to talk about a new playground going into a neighborhood. And the nonprofit put the playground there, and volunteers help build it, and people in the community come and use it, and kids are there, and it's for them. So there's two ways to tell a story like that. You can talk about how your organization put in all this time and effort, and we built the playground, or you can talk about how there's a playground there because of your dollars and your volunteer time, and here's how it's impacting the community. Instead of the kids going and doing whatever it is they were doing before, now they have a place that they can go. And now these kids and these families can utilize this resource because of your generous time and your generous money. That's the type of story that can include the details like Oprah talked about, or me with my ridiculous ticket story. And you could put that here with the spotlights, right? So I have an image here. This guy's called Vince. He's cleaning trash off the beach. And on the left, I say, meet Vince, our volunteer of the year. So you could tell that story there. That story can be elaborated on your website. So you can even have a link that says read more. And this doesn't have to be a report. I mean, this could be something that you post on Instagram, and once a month or once a week, you have a different picture of a different volunteer that you're highlighting through social media. And, entrepreneur and social media, we'll call him a maverick. Gary Vee always says you could take one piece of content and chop it up a million different ways so that you can use it on Instagram, Facebook. Then you could do an email campaign about it. Then you could save that content and use it in a presentation. and then collect it all and then put it in a report. So that's how you can take the effort of creating one story and have it run through multiple communication channels. That works for your fundraising, your fundraisers, for stewardship, for grant recaps, for talking to volunteers, and then leading up to a report like this. So I talked earlier about using existing social media posts to complement things that you want to write. So it's a little more engaging and interactive, no matter how you create a report, no matter how you communicate it out. But in a report, here's a Facebook post I found from an organization called Moms Helping Moms Foundation. And it said, we had a blast hosting Melinta Therapeutics for a volunteer session a few weeks ago. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. A couple of hashtags. This is the actual post. I just embedded it here, and it's actually, interactive. So using your imagination, this post has to do with Vince and this story of cleaning up. It all works together so that I'm really engaged as someone who might donate their time to your organization, donate money, maybe come on as a board member. And I'm engaged because it's an exciting way I'm telling the story. There's just a little text, and then I go to the picture, and then I'm reading the post. Any questions or thoughts on that, just pop them in the chat, and we'll see them. So I mentioned this is an ideal scenario. We all can't do everything, but since it's ideal, I'm putting all the check boxes that I would love to have here, and that includes a video. So I went and found a thank you. I went to YouTube and typed in, volunteer thank you video. This is, I think, the second one that came up, and I embedded this too in this impact report. And this is just a video that's saying thank you to volunteers. Imagine if this was just a quick clip of Vince cleaning up the trash off the beach, and you can kind of show that to help tell the story, right? It could be very general, it could be personal, it could be pertinent to that one story of the cleaning the trash off the beach or the playgrounds, or a recap for the whole year. It doesn't really matter, but I bet you that the people in this video that you're seeing right here are staff members or actual volunteers. So they're seeing their own faces, their neighbors are seeing their faces. And then when you lead up to that call to action to sign up new volunteers or whatever it is, maybe they made it that far in the communication piece of the report to do so. And then I went on to different sections there. I made that by using this report editor, where I built upon a template, and I just typed it in and just dragged and dropped all the photos that in here after I kind of built the report and dropped the embed code in, and very quickly, was able to create something like that using Yearly. And then, if I was to run a social media campaign based out of this, I would just take that same video, promote it on my social channels, and then maybe a week later take this post over here and promote that on my social channels, etc. So then it comes down to promoting this volunteer impact. You've built these campaigns, or one report, or you're just focusing on Facebook. If you have the resources to do more, that's great. But I think taking the assets that you already have, the stories that you already have, using them over and over is really important. But then you need to, whatever you create, you need to get the word out there. So using a volunteer impact report as the example, we would take that and we'd send it out through email like you would anything else. And you'd say, hey, everybody, take a look at this. We couldn't have done it without you. And then they're linking to whatever you're sharing there. If you're creating something that's not necessarily a social media post or a campaign, like a report, you can then promote all that through social media after you promote it through email. So you're hitting your audience through various ways. And then take whatever you're working on and have it on your website too. So no matter where your volunteers and your other constituents are looking, like donors and board members, they're seeing the efforts that you created. All right, Gung, I'm going to pause right there before we go into Q&A. I'm going to turn it over to you, if that's okay.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you for sharing all that. Yeah, and so one of the things I thought could be really interesting is, let me share my screen here as well. But basically just thinking about, when we have partners that come on with Civic Champs, we like to think, how could you actually make this happen in real life? What might that look like, or how might that feel? And so I just want to highlight that real quickly here as well. And so I'll bring up my slides here. Share screen 3. Here we go. Great. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. Yeah. All right, great. And so, yeah, we're gonna go. And so a couple things that Josh talked about, right, that I thought was really interesting. So one is this ability to perhaps highlight your metrics, right, as well. And there's a part of it that's around the stories that you're going to be telling, the sort of all the details. But also you want to celebrate sort of any sort of big win. So, this is just a screenshot of Civic Champs. And so at the very top, you have your metrics that you can also easily share and put into like an annual report. Similarly, right, you can also share out, right, something like a yearly report through Civic Champs, right? So you could select all the different volunteers that you might want to email out or text them a message. It could be a select all, or maybe it's something specific with just a few folks. And then you can say, hey, you check out our yearly report and see, how you've helped us so much over the past year, right? So that's just another way to tie yearly in with Civic Champs. And then the other thing that Josh mentioned a little bit was around testimonials. And so one of the things that you can do on Civic Champs is you can actually see reflections and feedback from your volunteers, along with sort of their smiley faces or frowny faces to capture a sentiment. And so for the folks that are really happy with you, right, this is a great way to find potential testimonials, right? Or if there's folks that are really happy, you might want to reach out to them, interview them, do something maybe like even with a little video or something, have them tell their story. And so this could be a really neat way to integrate with a tool like Yearly. And then real quickly, right, just so folks know how we collect that kind of information, right? So when this is our mobile app, so people can check in on it. And so you select your event, etc. And then a timer starts counting. And then at the end, when you're ready to check out, right, if you hit the checkout button, you're actually allowed to provide a feedback or testimonial or some sort of commentary, and you indicate if you had a really good time or not, right? And so that's just a way, I think, tools like Yearly, like Civic Champs, we can sort of be more integrated. So wanted to highlight that real quickly. And also for folks that may be on here that don't have any context of Civic Champs, right? That's a little bit of a short highlight of what we do in terms of helping to track and engage volunteers. So with that, in terms of takeaways from today, I don't know, Josh, if you want to dive back in and sort of highlight that.
Yeah, thanks. I'll do that really quickly. Keep the content really authentic. That's what I mean by unique to your brand. Then the stories that you're telling can't be confused with anybody else, especially as you're fighting for your volunteers to choose you over other things that they do. Keep the storytelling for volunteers and donors, really engaging, like we talked about, and show that impact in different ways. Think about all the different media assets that you have, or creative ways to display it, and don't feel shy about getting really creative about it, and just thinking about it a little bit differently.
I think, the one thing I'd always encourage folks, right, is I'm a big believer that anything oftentimes is better than nothing, right? In the sense that if you're thinking, oh man, this is a lot of work. So one, there's tools like Yearly that can make it a lot easier. But two, right, even if you had a 2-pager, right, something very simple and easy that you feel like you can actually do, right, like that's still of high value, right? And sometimes we have to give ourselves a little bit of grace in terms of just celebrating the wins, right, as we get them, and not, stress out about, oh, it's not exactly perfect, right? It's not as beautiful as I would like it.
Yeah, I mean, nothing's going to be perfect anyway. You get it out there, and then afterwards you realize, oh, I should have presented it like that or said that. So next time you improve upon it, but then you didn't waste time by not getting something out there. So I think that's spot on. Good advice.
Yeah. All right. And then so if you want to stay in touch with myself or Josh, right, this is our contact info. You see our beautiful faces. We're going to email this back out to everyone, both a recording of today, but also in terms of the slides as well. So if you're, instead of having to sort of busily take notes, you'll get that in an email here in a little bit. So, and then with that, yeah, Josh, do you want to talk about the freebie that you all are offering?
Yeah, sure. If anybody is interested in trying out yearly to build different types of reports like you learned about today, and you want to give it a shot and play around with it, we do offer a 14-day free trial. So just send me an email at josh@yearly.report, like you see on the screen here, and I will gladly set that up for you or give you a tour or answer any questions you may have.
Yeah. And similarly, on the Civic Champ side, right, we have an ebook that we put together. So if you've already downloaded it, that's awesome. But if you haven't seen this before, right, we put together a guide in terms of volunteer management, sort of best practices, both starting from recruitment and to engagement, to retention, to reporting, right. And so this might be a nice little booklet that you can review, and then some of you are probably doing lots of this already, but it could be a way to provoke some thought starters, right? And then for us, in terms of our deal for Civic Champ, so we like for all our webinar attendees, if you're an attendee, right, we have a 2-month free offer that you can redeem. And so all you have to do is just, if you book a demo with us, mention that you were on the webinar, and you'll be able to take advantage of this. Our standard, right, if you sign an annual, is sort of 1 month off. And so in this case, you get double that. And then last but not least here, before we dive into Q&A, is we have a lot of great upcoming webinars as well. And so the next one we have is on grant writing. So this is next Thursday. So we have webinars every Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern. And so next week, on the 5th, we're going to have our friends from RealQ. They're a nonprofit out of Pittsburgh. And very sort of grant reliant, if you will, in terms of their funding, but they're also experts in the space. And so they're going to share some grant writing 101s or tips in terms of how they can, how you can take advantage of grants, and what are some things to keep in mind when you're applying for grants. On the 19th, we're going to have Toby Johnson, one of the sort of preeminent experts here in the volunteer space. And so she's going to do a session around leadership tips for new or newer volunteer coordinator. She's been, providing guidance to volunteer coordinators and managers for, over 20 years. So just a tremendous wealth of knowledge. We're super excited to have her. And then on the 26th, we're going to do a session with our friends at the Education Partnership. And they're going to talk about how they engage and motivate parents, grandparents, or families in terms of volunteering, right? And so a lot of times we have, if you think about recruiting, right, if you can have events or activities that involve the whole family, or parents and kids, right, that really opens up the aperture in terms of who might be able to join you. And she's going to really, Stacy, she's going to really talk about that. They do a fantastic job with that. And then on the 2nd, we're going to have a session specific for mentorship. And so if you're a mentoring organization or a tutoring organization, we're going to have a consultant from TwoMentor join us on the webinar and just talk about how you can set up your mentorship program for success. And so, yeah, please, put a placeholder on your calendar for these dates if you're interested. You'll also be able to register for them as we send that sort of follow-up email. right? Now, with that, I think that's sort of the gist of. Oh, and thank you, Chloe, for putting it in chat. So you'll see actually the links to sign up for everything here in chat. So if you don't want to wait, you can just do it right now. Alrighty. In terms of Q&A, if folks have questions, yeah, please feel free to either come off mute or put it in chat, and so we'll get to that. I guess one of my questions, Josh, for you, right, to kick us off is you talked a lot about stories, right, and the power of storytelling. And you yourself used to be in the nonprofit space. You were director of marketing at 4-H. What's like a favorite story of yours around volunteerism, or like that you've heard that you thought, oh man, that's so inspiring, right?
I was in St. Louis, Gung, in 2015 and 16, I think it was, and we were at the first robotics world championships, and this is where kids of all ages are making robots that are doing tasks, and they're competing against other kids, and we're talking about groups of like 20 to 25 kids that would get together in a school or after school setting and create a robot and give it a task and would have to do something. Some of them would be robots that could play basketball. Some would be to do certain types of chores. They would program the robot. And there were maybe about 1,000 kids at the World Championships. This is after it laddered up, like from regionals and local competition. There were about 20 or 25 different groups of 4-H kids there, which is why I went for marketing purposes. And I was just kind of listening to their stories as some of the larger donors were being toured around the stadium where the Rams used to play before they moved to LA. And I think that one of the kids that was from Maryland, my state, said, oh, in this part of the robot here, he said this to the donors, with all these volunteers that were helping him stand around, I built using 3D modeling and a 3D printer. And he designed the piece of the robot, printed it out, put it in the robot, and then it actually worked and did the task. That was like this big wow moment for the donors. But what's going on behind the scenes really is that the volunteers had to teach them how to do that, and they came from the University of Maryland, and they were it's a volunteer focused organization there. So that was like a real proud moment, I think, for them, at least for me behind the scenes, to see something like that, and the kids actually learn these great life skills and then impress the donor because of the time that the volunteers put in. I also heard a lot of stories around how the volunteers were learning more from the kids with different things like that than the kids were learning from them. I heard that over and over, even in focus groups.
Yeah, that's almost like parenting in many ways, right? It's just reminding me of watching my kids learn something. Like, you feel so proud, but you're also learning a lot, right? In terms of how to motivate and manage at least little people, right? So no, that's a great story. Well, with that, I think this is the end of today's webinar. Again, Josh, thank you so much for joining us today. Really enjoyed your presentation and talking about how organizations can leverage storytelling and annual reports to motivate right and engage their volunteers. And so appreciate it. And for everyone else, please come join us again in the coming weeks for the other topics that we have coming up. But with that, I'll bid you all good afternoon, and we'll be in touch soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks to Civic Champs. Take care.